Dr. Tayri stepped off the transport shuttle onto Harmony Station, her silver-blue skin catching the artificial light. The orbital facility hung above Earth like a gleaming crescent, home to the first major scientific exchange program between humans and the Arcturian Alliance. Exactly. Jin placed the vial in a small holder and activated a molecular scanner. A holographic display appeared above the workstation, showing the compound structure. These chemical messengers evolved on Earth, but contained structural similarities to compounds found in samples from 3 other worlds, including preliminary data from Arcturus. Tayri studied the display, noting the familiar ring structures and binding sites. Fascinating. This supports convergent evolution theory across separate biospheres. Breathe normally, she reminded herself, adjusting the environmental settings on her translator badge. Earth's oxygen mix was richer than her homeworld's atmosphere, making her feel slightly lightheaded. A small welcoming party waited beyond the airlock. 3 humans and 1 Arcturian stood in formal posture, the humans displaying those curious facial expressions Tayri had studied, but still found difficult to interpret. Dr. Tayri, welcome to Harmony Station. I'm Dr. Jin, head of biochemical research. The human male stepped forward, extending his 5-fingered hand. His features appeared symmetrical by human standards, with dark eyes that studied her with scientific interest. Tayri extended her 6-fingered hand in return, having practiced the Earth greeting. Your welcome is acknowledged. Dr. Jin, the Arcturian Science Academy is pleased to participate in this exchange of knowledge. Their hands connected briefly. Tayri noted the warmth of human skin, approximately 4.3 degrees warmer than Arcturian standard temperature. Jin's expression shifted, forming what her cultural training identified as a smile. Allow me to introduce my colleagues, Jin said, gesturing to the others. Dr. Somi, our xenobiology specialist, Dr. Huan, our chief medical officer, and I believe you already know Dr. Larry from your academy. The Arcturian nodded formally. Indeed, Dr. Larry's work on interspecies protein folding is well regarded. After completing the introductions, Jin led the group through the station's curved corridors. We've prepared laboratory space that meets Arcturian specifications. Your quarters are in the diplomatic wing, with adjusted gravity and atmospheric controls. Tayri observed everything carefully. The station's design reflected human aesthetic preferences, curves where Arcturians would use angles, decorative elements where function alone would suffice. Yet she found it strangely appealing. Your first week will focus on orientation and establishing research protocols, Jin explained as they entered the main science complex. We're particularly interested in your insights on biochemical adaptation across species. My specialty focuses on receptor compatibility and chemical signaling between divergent evolutionary paths, Tayri responded. I have brought samples of Arcturian cellular material approved for research exchange. Jin's eyes brightened. Perfect. That aligns with my current work on universal signaling compounds. The laboratory doors slid open, revealing a space filled with equipment both familiar and foreign to Tayri. Workstations lined the walls, and transparent display screens showed complex molecular structures rotating slowly in 3 dimensions. This will be our primary workspace, Jin said. I'd like to show you something I've been developing. He approached a sealed containment unit and pressed his palm against the security scanner. The unit hummed softly, then opened to reveal rows of small vials containing liquids of various colors. These are experimental compounds based on interspecies chemical signaling, he explained, carefully removing a vial of amber liquid. This one is particularly interesting. A synthesized version of human pheromones with modified molecular structures designed to test cross-species recognition. Tayri moved closer, her scientific curiosity engaged. You theorize that certain chemical signals might transcend species boundaries. As Jin reached for a pipette to demonstrate the testing procedure, his sleeve caught on the edge of the workstation. The sudden movement knocked the vial holder, sending the amber vial tumbling. Time seemed to slow. Jin lunged forward. But too late. The vial hit the edge of the counter and cracked. A small amount of liquid spilled onto the surface, while an invisible mist of aerosolized compound dispersed into the air around them. Containment protocol, Jin called out. As warning lights flashed, automatic systems activated, creating a gentle air current that pulled the escaped material toward filtration units. Tae-ri instinctively moved to help, grabbing purification cloths from a nearby dispenser. She quickly wiped the spilled liquid while Jin secured the damaged vial in a containment box. "Are you all right?" Jin asked, concern evident in his voice. "Did any make contact with your skin?" "I do not believe so," Tae-ri replied, though she had felt a slight tingling sensation when cleaning the spill. The amount was minimal, and Arcturian skin has different absorption properties than human integument. Jin activated a handheld scanner and passed it over her hands and arms. Readings are normal. The compound shouldn't have any effect on Arcturian biology anyway. It was designed to interact with human receptor sites. The laboratory's ventilation systems completed their cycle, and the warning lights ceased. Jin appeared visibly relieved but embarrassed. "I apologize for the incident, Dr. Tae-ri. Not the best first impression of Earth science protocols. Accidents occur in all research facilities," Tae-ri responded neutrally. No harm resulted. The rest of the orientation proceeded without incident. Jin showed her the remaining laboratory sections, the data centers, and finally escorted her to her assigned quarters. "Rest cycle begins in 2 hours," he informed her at her door. "Would you like to join the science team for the evening meal? It would provide an opportunity for less formal exchange." Tae-ri considered declining. Arcturians typically preferred solitude after travel, but found herself unexpectedly interested in continuing their conversation. "That would be acceptable," she replied. Jin smiled again. "Excellent. I'll return at 1900 hours. After he departed, Tae-ri entered her quarters and began organizing her personal items. As she placed her research materials on the desk, she paused, realizing she had been replaying her interactions with Dr. Jin in her mind. Something felt different, a strange awareness of details she would normally consider irrelevant. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the precise tone of his voice, the careful precision of his movements. "Curious," she murmured to herself, dismissing the thoughts as a side effect of the new environment. By the time Jin returned to escort her to dinner, Tae-ri had changed into fresh attire and reviewed the station's research priorities. Yet throughout the evening meal, she found her attention repeatedly drawn to him in ways that defied scientific explanation. The first day of interspecies cooperation had begun, with neither scientist aware of the accidental experiment now underway. Tae-ri woke the next morning with an unusual sensation in her chest, a fluttering, almost like the wing beats of the small flying creatures that inhabited her homeworld's forests. She placed a 6-fingered hand over her heart, measuring its accelerated rhythm. "Irregular," she murmured, blinking at the ceiling of her quarters. Her dreams had been vivid, filled with images of Dr. Jin's face and hands. This was highly atypical for Arcturians, whose sleep cycles rarely included such specific imagery. She performed her morning preparation rituals with practiced efficiency, yet found herself spending extra time adjusting her appearance in the reflection panel. The silver-blue tone of her skin seemed more vibrant today, and she arranged her cranial ridges in the pattern denoting scientific focus. The laboratory was already active when she arrived. Several human scientists worked at various stations, but Tae-ri's attention immediately locked onto Jin, who stood examining data at the main console. "Good morning, Dr. Tae-ri," he said, looking up with a smile. "Did you rest well?" "I experienced adequate recovery time," she replied, though that wasn't entirely accurate. She had slept, but it hadn't felt restful. Jin gestured to the workstation beside him. "I've uploaded the research parameters for our joint project. I thought we could begin by comparing basic cellular response patterns." As Tae-ri moved to join him, she noticed details she had overlooked yesterday. The precise arrangement of his facial features, the way light reflected in his dark eyes, the careful movements of his hands as he manipulated the data displays. She found these observations strangely compelling. "Are you listening, Dr. Terry?" Jin's voice broke through her distraction. "Yes," she said quickly, though she had missed his last sentence entirely. "Please continue." They worked side by side for the next 3 hours. Terry struggled to maintain her typical Arcturian focus. Every time Jin moved closer to show her something on the displays, she became aware of his proximity in ways that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Your temperature is elevated," Dr. Larry commented when they passed in the sample storage area. The older Arcturian's gaze was analytical. "Are you experiencing difficulty with the station environment?" "No," Terry responded. "The environmental controls in my quarters are functioning correctly. Yet your skin displays thermal patterns consistent with physiological stress." Larry's head tilted slightly. "Perhaps you should visit the medical section." Terry agreed, if only to determine the cause of her unusual symptoms. The medical bay was quiet when she arrived. Dr. Huan, the human physician she had met yesterday, greeted her with professional courtesy. "Dr. Larry suggested I undergo examination," Terry explained. "I am experiencing unusual physiological responses." Dr. Huan nodded. "Let me run a basic scan first." The medical scanner hummed softly as it passed over Terry's body. Dr. Huan studied the results with growing interest. "Fascinating," she said finally. "Your neurochemical readings show elevated levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, or rather, the Arcturian equivalents. Your brain's bonding centers are highly active." "Bonding centers?" Terry questioned. "That makes no logical sense. Arcturian bonding requires specific rituals and compatible individuals. I have participated in neither." "The readings are clear," Dr. Huan insisted, showing Terry the scan results. The brightly colored areas of activity were unmistakable. "Is there any individual on the station with whom you formed a significant connection?" An image of Jin immediately appeared in Terry's mind, causing an involuntary ripple of color across her silver-blue skin, an Arcturian physiological response similar to human blushing. Dr. Huan noted the reaction but said nothing. She took a blood sample instead. "I'll analyze this and consult with Dr. Larry about Arcturian physiology," she said. "Return to your duties for now, but record any unusual symptoms." Terry returned to the laboratory, trying to process this information logically. Arcturians prided themselves on emotional control and rational thought. Whatever was happening to her fell outside normal parameters. Jin was alone in the lab when she returned, making adjustments to a molecular separator. "Dr. Huan called," he said, not looking up. "She mentioned you weren't feeling well." "I am experiencing some unexpected physiological responses," Terry admitted. Jin finally turned to face her, and Terry felt that strange fluttering sensation intensify. "Anything I should be concerned about as your research partner?" "I do not believe it will affect our work," she said, though she was less certain than she sounded. They resumed their analysis, Jin explaining a new technique for identifying molecular binding sites. His hand accidentally brushed against hers while reaching for a data tablet. The contact lasted less than a second, but Terry's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Her skin temperature spiked, her pulse accelerated dramatically, and the color rippled across her face and neck. Most alarming, she felt a sudden, intense desire to maintain the physical contact rather than withdraw as Arcturian social norms dictated. Jin noticed her reaction. "Are you sure you're all right?" Before Terry could respond, Dr. Huan entered the laboratory, followed closely by Dr. Larry. Their expressions suggested urgency. "Dr. Jin," Huan said, "I need to speak with you and Dr. Terry immediately." Jin frowned but nodded. "What's this about?" "I've analyzed Dr. Terry's blood sample," Huan explained, activating a display screen. "I found traces of compound H927. Jin's face paled. "The pheromone compound from yesterday's accident?" "Yes," Dr. Huan confirmed. Apparently some was absorbed through her skin during cleanup, despite our assumptions about Arcturian biochemistry. Dr. Larry studied the data with increasing concern. This explains the unusual readings. The compound appears to be interacting with Tyree's neurological systems in ways similar to traditional Arcturian bonding chemistry. Tyree felt a strange mixture of relief and embarrassment. Her reactions had a scientific explanation. She wasn't losing her mental discipline. She was experiencing a chemical reaction. But why would a human compound affect Arcturian biology? Jin asked, looking troubled. They evolved on different worlds. That's what makes this scientifically significant, Dr. Huan replied. There appears to be unexpected compatibility between certain human and Arcturian receptor sites. Jin turned to Tyree, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry. This is entirely my fault. The accident was not intentional, Tyree responded, maintaining composure despite the turmoil she felt. What is the expected duration of these effects? Dr. Huan consulted her data. Based on metabolic rates, the compound should clear your system within 3 to 4 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks. Tyree's composure slipped momentarily. The idea of experiencing these sensations for such an extended period was concerning. There's more, Dr. Larry added. The compound appears to have created a targeted response. The older Arcturian looked meaningfully between Tyree and Jin. The neurological patterns indicate a specific focus for the chemically induced bonding response. The implication hung in the air. Tyree felt another involuntary color change sweep across her skin as Jin looked at her with new understanding. You mean she's, Jin began, experiencing a chemically induced attraction, Dr. Huan finished. To you specifically, Dr. Jin. Tyree stood very still, her Arcturian training the only thing keeping her from displaying further signs of distress. The fluttering sensation in her chest had intensified to an almost painful degree. This situation requires careful management, Dr. Larry stated. I suggest temporarily reassigning Dr. Tyree to another research team. No, Tyree said firmly, surprising everyone including herself. The accident has created an unprecedented research opportunity. We should document these effects scientifically. Jin looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Are you certain? Working together might be uncomfortable for you. Science often requires personal discomfort, Tyree replied, and separating us would not change the physiological response. After a moment of consideration, Jin nodded. Then we'll approach this as scientists. We'll document the effects, analyze the compound's interaction with your biology, and perhaps learn something valuable about interspecies biochemistry. As the others discussed management protocols, Tyree silently confronted the reality of her situation. For the next several weeks, she would experience something no Arcturian had ever documented: an attraction to a member of another species, triggered by a chance chemical exposure. The scientist in her found it fascinating. The rest of her wasn't sure what to feel at all. The laboratory had gone quiet for the night. Most of the station staff had returned to their quarters, leaving only essential systems humming in the background. Tyree sat alone at her workstation, reviewing test results for the 5th time. The data confirmed what she had suspected. The compound in her system was not breaking down as quickly as Dr. Huan had predicted. The door slid open, and Jin entered, carrying 2 steaming cups. I thought you might still be here, he said, placing 1 cup beside her. It's called tea. Many humans find it helps with focus during extended work periods. Thank you, Tyree said, noticing how her pulse increased at his arrival, a reaction that had become familiar but no less distracting over the past 8 days. Jin glanced at her screen. Any progress? Yes, but not positive progress. Tyree gestured to the molecular models rotating on her display. The compound has bonded to my neuroreceptors more completely than we anticipated. The half-life appears to be 32 days, not 14. Jin's expression showed concern. A month. That's significantly longer than we thought. Tyree nodded, then made a decision. "Dr. Jin, I need to speak with you privately about something I discovered in my blood tests." "Of course," he replied, sitting down beside her. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, an unusual action for an Arcturian. "I have analyzed my own blood samples from before the accident. There was a small anomaly in my endocrine system that I did not consider significant at the time." "What kind of anomaly?" "A natural chemical production that mirrors, in some ways, your compound H927. She pulled up a new display showing two molecular structures side by side. The left is the human pheromone compound. The right is a substance my body was already producing in small amounts. Jin studied the display, his eyes widening. They're remarkably similar. The binding sites are nearly identical. Yes, which suggests that my strong reaction to your compound is not purely accidental. My biology was predisposed to respond to it. Taeree's voice remained steady, though the implications of her discovery troubled her. I believe this may explain why the compound affected me and not Dr. Larry or other Arcturians on the station. Jin leaned back, processing this information. So you're saying your body was already producing something similar to human attraction pheromones? How is that possible? I do not know. It defies current understanding of evolutionary biology. Taeree hesitated, then added, "There is something else you should know. I accessed your medical profile in the database." Jin looked surprised. "That's restricted information." "Yes, I apologize for the breach of protocol, but I needed to confirm my hypothesis." She displayed a new chart. "Your body produces unusually high levels of the base compound that was synthesized into H927, higher than 97% of the human population." Understanding dawned on Jin's face. "You're saying there's a specific chemical compatibility between us. That's why your reaction has been so strong." "The evidence suggests this conclusion." Taeree closed the display, unable to maintain eye contact, a very un-Arcturian behavior she had developed recently. "I believe we have accidentally discovered something significant about interspecies biochemistry." Jin was silent for several moments, then suddenly stood up. "Come with me. I want to try something." He led her to the advanced scanner room, a specialized laboratory space with equipment designed to analyze biological processes in real time. The room was rarely used due to the power requirements, but Jin activated it with his security clearance. "This scanner can track neural and chemical responses with millisecond accuracy," he explained, setting up the system. "I'd like to run a series of tests to see exactly how your brain is responding to various stimuli." For the next 2 hours, they conducted experiments. Jin presented Taeree with various stimuli, images, sounds, scents, while the scanner recorded her physiological responses. They tested her reactions to different humans and Arcturians. They tested distance variables, voice patterns, and even subtle changes in Jin's appearance and behavior. As the data accumulated, a pattern emerged that neither scientist had expected. "This makes no sense," Jin muttered, reviewing the results again. "Your reactions aren't consistent with pure chemical influence. There's something else happening here." Taeree studied the brain activity maps. "The bonding centers activate most strongly when you discuss scientific concepts or demonstrate problem-solving skills. And look at this reading." Jin pointed to another data set. "When I presented the ethical dilemma scenario, your neurochemical response showed classic signs of increased respect and trust, not just attraction." They looked at each other, the implications becoming clear. "The pheromone compound may have initiated the response," Taeree said slowly, "but it appears to have only amplified something that had potential to exist naturally." Jin nodded. "Your brain is responding to specific aspects of my personality and intelligence, not just my physical presence. And the effect is stronger when we engage in activities that align with Arcturian cultural values, scientific inquiry, logical reasoning, ethical consideration." Taeree felt both relieved and confused by this discovery. This suggests that while the compound created an artificial initial attraction, the ongoing response has legitimate components. Jin finished her thought. It's not just chemical, it's compatibility. They worked through the night, documenting their findings. By morning, they had developed a new theory that challenged fundamental assumptions about interspecies relations. Their data suggested that certain individuals across different species might share basic compatibility patterns that transcended evolutionary boundaries. As they compiled their research, Tae-ri noticed something else in the data. "Dr. Jin, look at your own readings." She displayed a chart showing his neural activity during their experiments. "Your brain is producing increased levels of dopamine and serotonin when we work together. Your bonding centers are also active, though less dramatically than mine." Jin stared at the readings. "That's not from any compound exposure." "No," Tae-ri agreed. "It appears to be a natural response." The implication hung between them, neither scientist quite ready to articulate it. "We need to present this research to the full science team," Jin said finally. "This discovery could change our understanding of interspecies relations. Some will question the validity of findings discovered under these circumstances," Tae-ri pointed out. "My judgment will be considered compromised." "The data speaks for itself," Jin replied with conviction. "We've discovered something remarkable here, a bridge between species that no one anticipated." As they prepared their presentation, Tae-ri realized that their accidental experiment had yielded not just scientific knowledge, but personal insight as well. The compound might have initiated her awareness of Jin, but science was now revealing something deeper, the possibility that connection could exist beyond the boundaries of worlds and species. "Dr. Jin," she said quietly as they finalized their data, "regardless of the compound's influence, I find our collaboration intellectually valuable." Jin smiled, understanding the significance of what, for an Arcturian, was a deeply personal statement. "I feel the same way, Dr. Tae-ri." Their discovery would soon change how humans and Arcturians viewed each other, not as alien entities to be studied with detached curiosity, but as different branches of life with surprising potential for meaningful connection. "The human who chemically seduced an Arcturian." The phrase echoed through Harmony Station's corridors, following Tae-ri and Jin like an unwelcome shadow. 2 weeks had passed since their discovery, and what had begun as scientific curiosity among their colleagues had morphed into something more problematic. Tae-ri stepped into the dining area and immediately noticed how conversations paused. Human and Arcturian eyes turned toward her before quickly looking away. She maintained her composure, selecting a tray of nutrition cubes compatible with her biology. Jin joined her at a small table in the corner. "The station director called me this morning," he said quietly. "Apparently our research has caught the attention of officials back on Earth and Arcturus." "That was expected," Tae-ri replied, though her skin rippled slightly with concern. An Arcturian emotional tell she was finding increasingly difficult to control. "Not just scientific interest," Jin clarified. "Political interest. The Arcturian High Council has expressed concerns about cultural contamination." Tae-ri set down her nutrition cube. "That terminology is troubling." Before Jin could respond, Dr. Larry approached their table, accompanied by a tall, imposing Arcturian. Tae-ri recognized immediately Director Kyo, senior representative of the Arcturian Science Academy. "Dr. Tae-ri," Director Kyo said, his formal tone carrying the weight of authority. "A private discussion is required. Please accompany me to the conference chamber." Jin started to rise. "Our research was conducted jointly. This matter concerns Arcturian protocols and standards," Director Kyo interrupted, his gaze never leaving Tae-ri. "Your presence is not appropriate, Dr. Jin." Tae-ri nodded slightly to Jin, silently asking him to accept this for now. She followed Director Kyo and Dr. Larry from the dining area, aware of the many eyes watching their departure. The conference chamber was small but formal, with the Arcturian emblem displayed prominently on one wall. 2 other Arcturian officials were already seated at the table. "Dr. Tae-ri," Director Kyo began without preamble. Your recent behavior and research activities have caused significant concern among Arcturian leadership. My research has yielded valuable scientific insights, Tae-ri responded calmly. Research conducted while under the influence of a human chemical compound, Dr. Larry noted. Your judgment has been compromised. Director Kyo activated a display screen showing images of Tae-ri and Jin working together in the laboratory. These recordings show multiple instances of inappropriate physical proximity and emotional displays unbecoming of an Arcturian scientist. Tae-ri watched the images with growing dismay. The recordings had been carefully selected to show moments when her control had slipped. A color change when Jin stood too close, a lingering glance, a moment when their hands touched while exchanging a sample. The Arcturian Science Academy has stood for 9 centuries as a bastion of logical inquiry and emotional discipline. Director Kyo continued. Finally, Director Kyo turned back to the assembled group. We will delay any personnel decisions pending a full review of the research data. Dr. Tae-ri will remain on station, but will undergo daily medical monitoring. Her contact with Dr. Jin will be supervised by Dr. Larry or another senior Arcturian. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't defeat either. Tae-ri inclined her head in formal acknowledgement. As the meeting dispersed, Jin approached her with concern evident in his expression. Are you all right? I am functional, she replied, aware of Dr. Larry watching them closely. Thank you for your intervention. They can't dismiss our discovery just because they don't like how it happened, Jin said quietly. This is too important. Later that evening, alone in her quarters, Tae-ri reflected on the day's events. The compound still affected her, still created unwanted emotional responses, but beneath that artificial influence lay something she couldn't easily dismiss: genuine respect for Jin, and genuine belief in the importance of their discovery. Her communication panel chimed with an incoming message. It was from Jin. Text only. Whatever happens, I believe in our work. And in you. Tae-ri stared at the message for a long moment, then allowed herself a small smile, a very human expression that, somehow, felt appropriate. 26 days after the accident, Tae-ri sat in the medical bay as Dr. Hwan reviewed her latest test results. The screens displayed complex molecular data, but the conclusion was simple enough. The compound has nearly cleared your system, Dr. Hwan announced, looking pleased. Only trace amounts remain, and those should be gone within 48 hours. Tae-ri nodded, absorbing this information. The physiological symptoms have decreased significantly. How do you feel? Dr. Hwan asked, setting aside her medical scanner. It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Tae-ri considered her response carefully. I am more myself, she said finally. The disruptions to my thought patterns have subsided. My pulse no longer accelerates unpredictably. My skin temperature has stabilized. Dr. Hwan smiled slightly. Those are the physical symptoms. I'm asking about you, Tae-ri. The use of her name without her title was still unfamiliar, though she had gradually adjusted to the human preference for personal address over formal titles. I am processing the experience, Tae-ri admitted. It has been educational. Later that day, Tae-ri worked alone in the laboratory, compiling the final data for their research presentation. The Joint Human-Arcturian Science Council would convene tomorrow to review their findings, with representatives attending virtually from both homeworlds. Jin entered, carrying 2 data tablets. The simulation results just came in, he said, setting one tablet beside her. The molecular modeling confirms our theory about receptor compatibility. Tae-ri looked up from her work. For the first time in weeks, she observed Jin without the overwhelming chemical influence that had colored her perceptions. She noted the intelligence in his eyes, the precision of his movements, the thoughtful expression as he reviewed their data. And she discovered something unexpected. The absence of the compound had not eliminated her awareness of him. Dr. Jin, she said quietly, I have an observation of potential significance. He looked up, curious. What is it? The compound is nearly gone from my system, Dr. Huan confirmed this morning that only trace amounts remain. Jin nodded. That's good news. You must be relieved. Yes, Tairi agreed. But I have noticed something unexpected. She paused, finding it difficult to articulate such a personal observation. My awareness of you persists, though in a different form than before. Jin set down his tablet, giving her his full attention. What do you mean? The intensity has diminished, but certain responses remain. I still find our conversations intellectually stimulating. I still notice details about your presence that I do not notice with others. She hesitated, then continued with Arcturian directness. I still experience what humans might call preference for your company. Jin was silent for a moment, processing her words. Are you saying what I think you're saying? The compound created an artificial attraction, Tairi explained. But as it dissipates, I find that not all of my responses were artificial. A smile slowly formed on Jin's face. I've been afraid to mention this, given your situation, but I've developed similar preferences. The presentation room was filled to capacity the next morning. Senior scientists from both species sat in the front row, while station personnel crowded the back. Director Kyo and the human station director sat side by side at the center table, their formal postures reflecting the importance of the occasion. Jin began their presentation, explaining the accidental exposure and their initial findings. Tairi then stepped forward to outline their research methodology and the controls they had implemented to account for her compromised state. The data reveals fundamental compatibility patterns that transcend species boundaries, she explained, displaying complex molecular models. Certain receptor sites in both human and Arcturian neural systems share structural similarities, despite evolving on different worlds. Jin continued, this suggests that basic biological attraction mechanisms may follow universal principles rather than purely species-specific pathways. Throughout the presentation, Tairi noticed the changing expressions on the faces of the council members. Initial skepticism giving way to scientific curiosity, then to cautious acceptance as the evidence mounted. Our research indicates that while cultural and physiological differences between our species are significant, certain fundamental biological systems operate on similar principles, Tairi concluded. This has implications beyond biochemistry, extending into potential areas of psychological and social compatibility. When they finished, the room fell silent. Director Kyo was the first to speak. Your research is compelling, he admitted reluctantly, though the circumstances of the discovery remain problematic from an Arcturian perspective. The human station director leaned forward. I see it differently. Dr. Tairi's accidental exposure created a unique opportunity to observe interspecies compatibility in action. Her willingness to continue the research despite personal discomfort demonstrates the highest scientific principles. Discussion continued for hours as experts from both species debated the implications. Eventually, the council reached a decision. The Joint Council approves the continuation of this research line, announced the human chairperson. Furthermore, we recommend the establishment of a dedicated interspecies biochemistry division to explore these findings further. Director Kyo added, leadership of this division will be jointly held by Dr. Jin and Dr. Tairi, provided Dr. Tairi's final medical evaluation confirms the compound has fully cleared her system. Later that evening, Jin and Tairi stood in the station's observation dome, watching Earth rotate slowly below them. Stars filled the viewport beyond, countless points of light against the darkness. They're offering us the division leadership, Jin said, still sounding surprised. A year ago, such close collaboration between our species would have been unimaginable. The accident created an unexpected path, Tairi observed, one neither of our species had considered. Jin turned to face her. Now that the compound is gone, we have decisions to make. Professional ones, of course, but also personal ones. Tairi considered this. Arcturians typically approach relationships systematically. We establish compatibility, then move forward with careful steps over considerable time. And humans often follow their instincts, sometimes moving too quickly, Jin admitted. Perhaps we could find a middle path. A scientific approach, Tairi suggested. Controlled variables, careful observation, documented results. Jin smiled. Are you proposing we study our own potential compatibility? It would be a logical extension of our research, she replied, a hint of humor in her voice, another human trait she had gradually adopted. Jin reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When she remained in place, he gently took her 6-fingered hand in his 5-fingered one. Different, but compatible, he observed. Tairi felt her pulse increase slightly, not from any compound now, but from genuine response. An apt summary of our research findings. Above them, the stars witnessed something new. Not just the beginning of a relationship between two individuals, but a new understanding between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly different. As ambassadors prepared to share their discovery with both homeworlds, Tairi and Jin knew that the accidental experiment had revealed something profound. That connection could transcend the boundaries of evolution, biology, and worlds.